the dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, the heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set two plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, fourth floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator. Cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects. Day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said "Ecology means everything" had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours. A late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name patch read Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. "Steam off," he said. "Air handler off. You got a ghost heater." He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron, the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. "Do you mind?" he asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm, the kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. "Old Chase," he said. "Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them." He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. "Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers." He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. "I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan." He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 1:18. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. "Sleep," he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: "Minor fire, major evacuation. No injuries, cause unknown." Mairead, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 3:03, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. There, she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens. Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, "Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall." The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these. Inside the library's bound journals, someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Mairead came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. We have to find the cabinet, she said, voice quiet like church. We have to ask Bram to not ask questions. Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. I can get you into the basement, he said. I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast. The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, Steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, done. A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, Juniper, thank you. She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. What do you want? She said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator. At the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel, a tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The 4th floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pump slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick. She heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Mairead was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Mairead tuned by memory and sang a single, low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The 4th floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Mairead sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. "Facilities found something," he said. "You want to come see?" The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76 when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep, mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter. Real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address, for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. "I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Mairead spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester," which is a low bar that feels high after October. Isolde slept early and woke with the feeling of being watched in a kind way. She rolled over and looked at the open panel. The chase breathed a soft, neutral air. She whispered the habit of her thanks the way some people say grace. For the cool, for the note, for the way buildings hold hands with the people who listen. In January, when the term began again and the air cut like paper, the room behaved. The radiator learned its job when asked. The night stopped bringing heat like a dare. The panel stayed off anyway. They left it open not because they liked the view of a dark shaft, but because some doors, once discovered, should not be forced to forget they can open. One night in late February, when snow made a tidy line along the windowsill and the hall smelled like wool and wet boots, Mairead tuned and held a low note the way a person can hold a breath when they want the person across from them to finish their thought. The glass on the radiator did not ripple, the tick did not come. She let the note go, she smiled. Habit broken, she said, and then added, or perhaps trained. Spring came in fits of joy and apology. Sutter Hall turned quiet, then loud, then quiet again. Finals chalked the sidewalks with equations and wishes. On the last afternoon before move-out, Gentry and Tova came by with a work order that did not need signatures. "We are capping the chase permanently," Tova said. "Not the kind of permanent that forgets. The kind that leaves a note for the next person." Gentry nodded at the open panel. "Leave it if you want, we're not offended." He tapped the cinder block once with his knuckle and said, "Thanks for telling us. We need buildings to snitch on us. Otherwise, we fix the wrong things." They closed their boxes. They took the plants off the sill. They rolled the rug into a new shape. Bram signed their checkout forms with a flourish. In the hall, Isolde taped one last paper to the wall at eye level between 412 and 416. Not a manifesto, not a myth, a map. She had printed 2 copies. The little red dot, the words, "If your room gets warmer every night, you are not dramatic and you are not alone." The panel in the closet is held by 4 screws. Please listen for the tick. Please go to the basement cabinet with the green dent. And please, sleep. Your spine remembers its job when you do. She signed it tiny, just initials, because the story did not belong to her alone. Years later, when she would sleep in cities with windows that sealed shut and air that arrived by command, she would sometimes wake at 1:27 and rest her palm against the wall. Habit. Memory. A check-in with the building around her. She would feel the honest cool of drywall. She would hear the thrum of someone's TV 3 floors down, or a neighbor's late laugh, and think, heat pretended to be sound, then sound pretended to be heat, and we learned to name what was ours to name. If you are listening to this, and your room keeps getting warmer every night, put your hand on the wall. Count between the ticks if you hear them. Call the person with the name Patch and the quiet eyes. Ask them to look for the habit behind the system. And if you find a note in a chase, write your own, then leave the panel open long enough for the room to remember it can breathe. The night will arrive either way. It is better when it finds you ready, with a glass of water on the radiator and a song in your pocket that knows how to lay its hand gently on the room and say, "We hear you, we're staying. We're going to keep you company until morning cools the world back into something we can bear." She bought a storage unit. The tape inside explains. She bought the storage unit on a wind-pushed Saturday in early October, the kind of day when flags along the frontage roads snapped like polite warnings and the auctioneer's voice carried clean across the lot. The place was called Milepost Storage, just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, a long row of corrugated doors facing a strip of prairie that kept trying to become a parking lot. She was not a flipper by trade. She was a librarian who liked old paper and lost letters. Her name was Leora Penn, and she raised her hand on a hunch when the auctioneer said the original renter had defaulted contents as is, cash only. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2020, that long elastic year that stretched and snapped and stretched again. Leora had a quiet car with a trunk that clicked shut like a punctuation mark. She had a brother named Finch who texted her thrift store photos like fortunes. She had a mother in assisted living who remembered questions but not answers. And now, for $430, she also had Unit B, 17, 6x10 dust inscription on the floor like an abandoned sentence. The auction staff cut the lock. The door went up with a skipped beat rattle. A smell slid out that was not quite mildew and not quite time. The light, sweet rot of cardboard and old leather. Inside, 3 banker's boxes labeled with a hand that pressed too hard. 1 wardrobe box crumpled along one spine. A busted desk lamp with a brass gooseneck shaped like a question about to be asked. A milk crate of records with sleeves that had forgotten how to hold themselves. And on top of everything, as if someone had said it last and with a decision, a small gray cassette player with a built-in speaker and a rectangle of yellow tape across its lid. On the tape, block letters in Sharpie, "Play me first." The wind moved in the alley between the units and made the metal doors talk to each other. Leora crouched in the rectangle of shade, thumb hesitating for the length of one breath, then pressed the play button. At first, there was only hiss, then a rustle that could have been a sleeve or a curtain, then a man's voice testing his own name like a microphone check. "This is Calder March," he said. "If you found this, you probably also found the rest. Please listen to the whole thing before you throw anything away. I am not saving myself here. I am trying to return what does not belong to me." The date is June 23rd, 2003. The place is Driftwood Storage on Route 49 outside Amarillo. I am saying that out loud, so when the tape gets copied and mislabeled, I can still put the world back where it goes. The sound of a chair leg grumbled against concrete. Papers shuffled. A small metronome of tapping began and stopped. The man took a breath that had a weight in it. "I fixed pianos for 20 years. Churches. Schools. People with money who thought sound was furniture. In '97, I started keeping a log of every instrument that had a story stuck in it. By story, I mean the thing you hear when the room gets quiet and the wood remembers. Don't roll your eyes. If you have never heard cedar explain itself at midnight, that is not my fault." Leora smiled despite herself. She didn't know why she had nearly laughed. Maybe because the voice was so unembarrassed by its own certainty. She adjusted the little volume wheel, the speaker fuzzed, then settled. "I am recording this in a storage unit for a reason," Calder said. "There is a Baldwin Acrosonic in here with its fallboard down and its keys covered by a towel that used to be jade green. On top of it is a shoebox with the words 'Keep for Jaspers' written in pencil. I took that box from a house that was being cleared in a hurry. I told myself I was keeping it safe. I told myself I'd hand it back when the time was better. That was 8 years ago. The time never got better. It got brighter and louder, and then it got mean, and the box stayed under my bed like a small dog that thinks it has permission. Today, I am putting it where it belongs, which is somewhere a person can choose it or not choose it without me choosing for them." The tape clicked. He continued, "If you are Jaspers, or you loved one, or you know one, please keep what matters and toss the rest. Just know this first. The shoebox contains letters between two people who met at night school at Tulsa Community in 1974. Their names were Odell Frost and Evo Jaspers. He was 20 and thought he was already late. She was 24 and tired in a way a person shouldn't be at 24. They wrote like the world was going to let them live wherever they set the words down. The letters stopped just before Christmas, 1976. The reason is not a twist. It is the average tragedy. She got sick and then sicker. He did not know how to write to a sickness that took her mouth away. The last letter is his to her. He mailed it 3 days after the funeral. The envelope came back rubber-stamped, forwarding order expired. It sat in a house for 2 decades until I was tuning the family's Kimball, and they told me to set aside anything sentimental for the dumpster. And you see, I have a dumb belief that paper should be read before it is burned. A gust pushed gravel down the row like a handful of beads. Leora paused the tape and looked into her unit, as if the boxes could confirm this story. She set the player on the wardrobe box and lifted the top of the nearest banker's box. Receipts. Polaroids with the color cooled to a vintage sadness. A folded travel map with lines drawn like veins between Amarillo and Tulsa. The milk crate of records gave up a Carole King sleeve, Rumors with a coffee ring, a gospel record from a church in Sepulpa. The cassette player droned a faint motor whine as if it were eager to continue. She pressed play. "Ivo," Calder said, shifting into the second person, like someone who has been telling a story too long to keep pretending he isn't inside it. "If you're listening, I kept something that was not mine because I thought the world would eat it. I am an idiot in exactly that way. I am also your accomplice now if you want me." In the bottom of the box, you'll find a tape that isn't this one. It is labeled December 27th, and you can guess the year. It is her, Odell. The last night, she felt up to getting her voice into a machine. She didn't tell you because she didn't think the machine could hold the shape she wanted to say to your face. I don't think machines can hold shapes either, but sometimes they keep the outline well enough that a person can fill it in. If you would rather not hear it, don't. Burn it and say a kind word and go make a sandwich. If you would, then sit and be ready to forgive yourself after. Whatever you do, don't listen driving. Ask me how I know. Leora's hands moved before her mind did. She slid the wardrobe box aside and hauled the banker's boxes out into the light. The tape ran. Calder cleared his throat once, then offered one last breadcrumb. I am going to leave this unit with rent paid for 6 months. I'm leaving the desk lamp that looks like it belonged to someone who wanted to read long after the room gave up. I am leaving the Baldwin cupboard, which is disrespectful to instruments and necessary for dust. If you are not Ivo or Kin and you opened this and felt a tug, maybe you are the kind of person who opens doors in museums you're not supposed to open. I can't stop you. But if you take the tape, take the box too. Stories get lonely if you split them. All right, that is me done. I'm going to label this Play Me First and lock up. I will drive to a diner where the coffee tastes like someone loved it an hour ago, and I will not look back. Good night. The tape wheezed to a stop and stayed there with its little spools paused, like eyes that had decided to blink and stuck. Leora ejected it. The cassette was the cheap clear kind with gray hubs, a bite taken out of one corner like a mark from a nervous jaw. She set it aside carefully and went to work on the shoebox in the bottom of the second banker's box. There it was, the penciled keep for Jaspers, in a hand that had tried to write neatly when it wanted to run. The lid resisted at first with that dry hiss cardboard makes when it has sealed to itself. She slid a fingernail under and lifted. On top, letters in a stack, rubber band fossilized to a brittle loop, and then snapped quietly when her thumb found it. Dates in the corners. 1974 in April. 1975 with summer still in the stamp. A ticket stub to a cinema that no longer existed. A brochure for night classes with prices that looked like jokes now. And at the bottom, as promised, a cassette slid against the rough cardboard and knocked once. Leora lifted it out. The label was crooked. December 27th. The year written very small. 1976. Her hands were not shaking, but they were listening. Her car's dash still had a tape deck because she had refused to trade it in for a newer something that didn't have teeth for music. She almost walked to the car. Then she stopped because a voice in her head sounded suspiciously like Calder's caution about driving and hearing a thing that bent your understanding of what sound can hold. She looked around for an outlet. The storage office would have one, but the manager had retreated with his clipboard and his coffee to the room with the little TV. Leora picked up the cassette player. A miracle. It had batteries. She grinned at an object in 2020 that ran on forgiveness and double A's. She set the old player on her trunk, fed the tape in with the care the machine rewarded by accepting it smoothly, and pressed play. Hiss. The slow wind of old magnetism waking. A distant clink like a glass set on tile. Then a woman's voice that arrived the way snowfall sometimes arrives in a drought, soft first, then unapologetic. Evo Jaspers, she said, you told me never to record because I try to edit my life when there is a red light. I am ignoring you because not everything we decide together should stay decided. It is the 27th. Christmas is done with me. I am done with it. I wore the scarf you bought, even though it makes me look like a librarian from a story where the librarian unbuttons her blouse at the end and chooses a wild life. Stupid scarf, perfect scarf, I loved it. I am sitting at the kitchen table, and I can hear the refrigerator think, you always say refrigerators think too much, and look how the milk tastes of thinking. The voice was not shaky. It had the kind of steadiness that is not bravado, but a gift a person gives to the people listening. Odell breathed in as if drawing a line she wished were longer. I am not going to make it to spring, she said in the tone of someone admitting they are not going to make it to a movie on time. Nothing tragic in my voice, love. I am trying to keep the tragedy in my hands on this table. I want to put them down gently so they do not wake anyone. I am not afraid. That is not bravery. The body is tired, like a clock, that has been asked to keep time for a dance that went one song too long. What I am is greedy. I want more of you. I want to watch you learn how you stand when there is a child at your hip and a skillet on the stove and a song in your head. I want to hear your temper, forgive your mouth. I want to finish organizing the Broken Spine novels at the bookstore, even though we both know I only work there to borrow sentences and put them back. But a person doesn't get to want and get in the same breath. Leora leaned against the car and closed her eyes for a count that surprised her with its length. The lot around her had its own noise, the rattle of a chain on a flagpole, a truck lugging in second, a crow that had lost its patience with something on the fence, but the voice made those sounds pat themselves on the head and promise to be quiet. You asked me once what I wanted you to do if I left first, Odell went on. I said remarry and be happy, because that is what you are supposed to say if you do not want to be accused of clutching. I have a different answer now, and I am allowed to revise because I am still here with breath in my pocket. I want you to put a box in a place where a stranger could find it, with instructions that say, take what you need. Not because I think romance belongs in thrift shops, but because the world seems to pass its tenderness along that way. We pay attention to what we do not expect to find. We pick up what someone else set down and we think, oh, I get to decide two lives right now, mine and theirs. It makes us more careful with both. She laughed, that short, violent laugh people make when they almost cry and disagree with their face about it. If you find this after I am gone, congratulations on your snooping. You love me enough to live in my kitchen after my kitchen belongs to dust. You love me enough to put your ear to a machine when it would be easier to put your head in a pillow. I will not say do not be sad. Be as sad as you please. Be ridiculous with it for a while. Wear your sadness out like shoes on a long walk, and then when they have holes in them, throw them away and go barefoot for a month. But promise me you will buy new shoes when the weather turns. Promise me you will keep a stove fuel canister in your car because someday you will offer it to a stranger at a trailhead, and this will be the way the world returns. Something I am stealing right now by leaving. The tape made a small, warbly sound as the tension shifted, then continued. Listen to me bossing you around, Odell said, fond exasperation in the syllables. I am going to put this tape in a box with letters you never saw. You called me a magpie when we met, and look, all I have collected are words and ticket stubs. The letters are mostly me, because you hated writing on paper that did not have music staves, and you did not think words would stay put if they could not sit on bars. The last letter is yours. You wrote it inside your head, and will write it later with a pen. The pen will do its best, the paper will do its best. Here is the part I cannot make neat. I want you to leave the box somewhere you do not own. A storage unit, a church basement, the free shelf in the back of the bookshop. Somewhere a person has to choose to look twice. She paused, and the tape sighed with her. The thing you always say about pianos is in my head, she murmured. That they carry the memory of every hand that asked them to be more than wood. I don't know what I am asking you to be. More than wood. Less than a shrine. Something that can be picked up and put down without breaking. You are good at that. Your hands know how to pass a thing. The end of the tape came with a soft click, like a door catching. Silence fell with dignity. Leora stood in the concrete wind, the cassette player ticking to itself, and realized she had been holding her breath in a way that made her chest feel like a drawer that didn't want to open. She exhaled and felt the world get its shape back around her. The storage yard's manager had wandered out to smoke and had stopped in the doorway, watching her kindly from behind his own weather. He raised his chin in that American way that means, do you need another person or should I go pretend not to see you? She shook her head and put her palm on the trunk as if the metal could read it. The letters in the shoebox were not neat. They were fierce. They were church and break room and bus stop and laundromat. They were written on grocery lists and margins of community college handouts and the backs of band flyers. They smelled like every hand that had held them, plus cedar dust and a sweetness that might have been someone's perfume from a life that had learned to be generous with its molecules. Leora read the first one standing there in the wind and then had the sense to stop. Some reading needs a table, a glass of water, and a chair that learned patience. She loaded the car with a librarian's Tetris, slid the cassette player into the passenger footwell where others might put a tiny dog, paid the auction manager who counted cash with a resigned gratitude, and drove to the house where nobody waited for her, the kind of vacancy that makes room for new things and also makes the old ones echo. Night arrived in the square way it arrives in October on the plains. Leora made tea and wrapped her mother's afghan around herself in a way that would have made her mother tut with approval. She set the shoebox on the kitchen table and arranged the tapes and letters like she was about to catalog them and would not be punished if she took her time. She allowed herself 3 letters, then the rest tomorrow. It became 4, then 5, then midnight, then 1 in the morning with the lamp glass warm and the tea cold. Odell wrote like a sparrow sings, plain and suddenly cruel with truth. I have not learned how to trust a day that stays good, she wrote in early summer. And then, in late autumn, I am practicing believing you when you say soup counts as dinner. She wrote about the bookstore where old men argued kindly about baseball and pretended to forget to leave so they could be told to stay. She wrote about the night school classroom that smelled like pencils and tired. She wrote about a piano in a church basement with 2 keys that hung back like shy children, and the way Ivo tuned them like he was begging the room to promise to be itself. Ivo appears in the margins of the letters, the way the person a letter is written to appears without ever entering the room. He is funny the way people are funny when they are not trying. He is a fixer of everything except his own habit of leaving tools where he used them last. He wants a straight answer from the future and refuses to ask the question politely. He plays blues in E and refuses to apologize. He brings home oranges when money says no because the taste of an orange is the opposite of a mistake. The last letter was his, and Leora saved it for the last. Don't make it tidy, she told herself, and read it anyway with a kind of fear that felt like jumping into water she already knew was cold. Odell, he wrote, the loop of his J from her surname cutting clean across the top line. Today, the mailbox understood time better than I did. It gave me back the envelope I had paid to send. I am grateful to a thing that has no mouth. I am writing this in the room where you laughed at me for liking a rug with so many flowers it looked like the rug was trying too hard. The rug is trying less hard without you. Everything is. I put your scarf on the back of the chair you always refused to let the cat sleep on, and the cat sat there for an hour, mad as a relative. I do not know how to be a person. Yesterday I did, and I expected to today, and look, I will try again tomorrow, because you made me promise to be stupid with trying. I am putting a shoebox where the world can trip over it. If a stranger finds it, I hope they are the kind who is brave enough to open things that are not theirs and gentle enough to put them back. I hope they write to tell me so I can stop pretending the box is a secret and call it what it is, a return. He had signed only Ivo and then, smaller, forgive me for not getting there in time for the last joke you told that wasn't funny. I would have laughed if you had asked me to, but I am glad you didn't ask me to. Leora slept in the chair with the afghan around her shoulders and the tape player on the table like a small guardian that had learned to keep watch without being asked. Morning came with a plainness that felt like a blessing. She woke, poured new tea, and wrote on a note card with firm letters that made the pen behave. To anyone named Jaspers connected to Odell Frost. Please call. Then she paused, took a breath, and replaced the word call with write. She did not know why until later, when the answer came folded in an envelope that smelled like someone's drawer. She found Ivo in the only way some people can be found now, by a trail of mentions that led to an obituary that did not brag. He had died in 2011 in a house where the cat had once slept on a chair. The obituary had the names of a sister and her 2 sons, a line about the instruments he had tuned for churches that might not have known what generosity costs, and a sentence that made Leora grip the paper. Survived also by the music he never got to write and the people who played what he fixed. The sister lived in Ponca City then. A search produced a different address in Bartlesville now. Leora wrote the note card anew and set it under a magnet on her refrigerator to stare back at her while she did dishes and decided if it was her place. 2 days later, she mailed a letter with the caution and audacity of a person who has to cross a room to hand a stranger back their own past. She included a copy of Calder's label in the corner because she wanted to prove that intention can be inherited. She waited. Waiting learned her name and sat down in her kitchen with its patient lamp. In a week and 2 days, an envelope arrived with a stamp that had been placed on at a slight angle, the way a person with a careful hand becomes human at the last second. The return address said Jasper's, and Leora sat down on the rug and read with her back against the pantry door. Dear Miss Penn, it began in a slanted script. My name is Anza Jaspers. I am Ivo's niece. I do not know how you got my address, but if you did it politely, I will thank you instead of yell. My uncle used to say, if you make a thing and put it in the world, you do not get to decide how it travels. I am relieved he is right. I know about Odell because I am named after her. He told my sister and me her story when we turned 12 so we would not confuse romance with rescue, and he told it again when we turned 20 so we would not confuse grief with identity. He had a box. We never saw inside it. He kept it under his bed like a grudging god. When he got sick, he told me there was a man named Calder who once did a kindness and a theft at the same time, and that someday the box might return the slow way. If it came, he wanted me to write back to the person who carried it, so I am writing. Tell me what you have. Tell me what you want me to do. If this is a joke, I will forgive you, because it would not be a funny one. Leora wrote back with copies of the first pages, careful not to let her own hunger make her rude. She offered to drive. Anza wrote back the next day with a time and a pot roast menu, as if there were no other way to do this than to feed someone. The drive to Bartlesville took the length of an album and a half, which is not how a librarian measures time, but this time it was. The clouds lay low and thin like a sheet pulled over a lamp. Leora parked in front of a house with white trim that looked like it had been painted by a person who knows how to steady a brush by leaning against the ladder. The door opened before Leora knocked. A woman in her 40s stood with her hands already out, not for an embrace, but for a receipt that weighed more than the shoebox. Behind her, a man waved from the kitchen. The smell of onions and thyme made everything gentler. Anza was the kind of person whose face tells you 50 stories before her mouth says one. She took the box and set it on the table and did not open it for a full minute. Then she did. Her mouth moved, a little, not because she was trying to speak, but because a person's lips sometimes learn to read when their eyes cannot keep up. They listened to the tape at the table with hands flat on the wood, not because anyone asked them to, but because it felt like a way to offer stillness to Odell's voice. When the part came about being ridiculous with sadness and wearing it out like shoes, Anza laughed the small laugh of a person who recognizes the flavor of the advice. He said that, she murmured. He said it like he was inventing the metaphor in front of us, and I have a tape of the original. The room held that sentence like it was catching something fragile. They ate pot roast with pieces of potato that had learned the taste of everything else in the pan. They drank coffee that was new enough to forgive any conversation. They opened the box and took out letters with their hands, like museum workers without gloves. They spoke names like they were calibrating a piano, tuning each syllable until it answered back. That night, Leora drove home under a sky that pretended to be empty and was not. She left the radio off so the car could hear what the night was doing. She slept and dreamed of a storage unit that kept changing its door color, and every door she opened was a different past returning itself. She woke with the taste of dust in her mouth and did not mind. In the weeks that followed, the box lived a second life in a house that understood how to host it. Anza read a letter a day out loud at the table with the window cracked and the dog asleep under her feet. She wrote Leora small updates. Today I learned how Odell laughed at my uncle's fear of oranges. Today I learned that night school used to smell like chalk and resolve. Today I learned that a person can fit a year inside a paragraph and still find room for the weather. Calder's name became a project. They wanted to thank him and did not know how to find his breath in the web. Leora tried phone directories from Amarillo with her librarian stubbornness. She found 3 Calder marches that were not him and one who had moved 2 years prior with no forwarding address. She found a piano tuner's business listing with a disconnected number. She turned to a stack of clippings and found, in a small column with a blurry photo, a mention of a memorial for a Calder M in a church that had bad lighting and kind carpet. The date was 2007. The photo showed a pair of hands holding a felt strip and a tuning hammer. The caption did not brag. A life, it suggested, that had done work and left the room better. Anza wrote a letter anyway. She wrote it as if it were going to be read out loud to a person who could not afford to be bothered unless the bother was beautiful. She mailed it to the church. She mailed one to the storage facility in Amarillo in case anyone there had inherited the story. She put one in a book at the free library on her block, tucked into a copy of a novel nobody seems to want when they need it and everybody wants when they have room. She addressed one to no one, put no stamp on it, and tucked it in the shoebox under the letters. In December, Snow performed its first attempt, failed, and tried again with a more persuasive voice. Leora went to visit her mother, who held her hand, and asked her what year it was, with a tone that admitted timelines are slippery now. Leora said it aloud, 2020, and then, when her mother smiled at the neatness of the numbers, Leora added, "It is also Tuesday afternoon, and you like soup." Her mother nodded, satisfied by specifics. Leora read to her from one of Odell's letters. Her mother, who had always loved women who refused not to be clever, laughed once and said, "Tell her to write more." "I'll tell her," Leora said, and did not correct the tense. On the last day of the year, a small package arrived on Leora's porch in weather that could not decide whether to rain. It was wrapped in brown paper with string, old-fashioned on purpose and not by necessity. The return address was a music shop in Amarillo that smelled when she opened the door of rosin and hope. Inside the box, a cassette labeled in a different hand. It said simply, "Driftwood." Then, a date in 2003. A note was tucked in. "You do not know me," it read. "I run the counter at the place where Calder used to buy strings cheap and swear under his breath that the new strings had no patience. We found this in a drawer where the receipts go to forget their names. He left it here the week the storage unit auctioned off his things. He told me to hold it for a person who would ask nicely. No one did. Maybe you are that person." She put the tape into the player with a care that made the table hear it. The hiss began like a tide. Calder's voice arrived, older or tired, she couldn't tell. He spoke as if he had skipped the first parts he usually said because he felt he owed a different kind of sentence. If this is Leora, or Anza, or someone else kind who made room for a box to travel, listen. I wanted to write a clever instruction for how to put things back. I do not have one. The closest I have is this. When you find a story mid-sentence, do not add your name to the end like a signature. Put your name small in the margin as a witness. Then hand the page to the person whose life it is and let them choose their own pen. He laughed softly, like a man who had decided to stop scolding himself and was enjoying the quiet. The Baldwin in Unit B17 has a hairline crack in the bridge that will not keep it from speaking if someone loves it anyway. Pianos are like that. People are like that. You will think you have to fix the crack to deserve the music. You do not. You will think the crack is the point. It is not. The point is that the thing still says what it came to say. The tape ended without drama. Leora sat in her kitchen with the shoebox open and the lights soft and the winter outside, pretending it would not ask for more heat. She took out Odell's last tape and listened again, not to study, but to keep a promise to let a voice use the room. She held the letters that had traveled across years, and storage fees and dust and a man's guilt. She smiled down a hallway of time toward a piano she would never see. In February, Anza sent a photo. It was the Baldwin, its towel folded and placed properly, its fallboard up, a vase of eucalyptus on the far end because some leaves talk quieter and longer than flowers. The caption said, "It holds tune better than it should." Anto would have called that grace. The next photo was a child's hand, Anza's daughter, pressing middle C like a doorbell. The next, a dog asleep under the bench. Spring learned its way up from the soil. Leora took the empty cardboard from her unit to the paper recycling, and the man there told her his mother had kept a box of napkins with love notes on them that the family found when the house had to forget them. People put thoughts anywhere, he said, and laughed a little as if proud of humanity's mess. She kept the cassette player. She kept the first tape that said, "Play me first," and the second that said December 27th because some objects become addresses. She kept a copy of one letter that had a sentence she recited on days when the library had more books than hands and more requests than hours. The sentence was Odell's, and it said, "I do not write to be wise. I write to leave a door open in case someone needed that exact door today." On a June morning, with thunder stacked like books no one had time to read, Leora pulled into milepost storage for the last time. She slid her unit door up, empty, except for the desk lamp that curved its brass neck, and asked if she was sure. She plugged it in and turned it on, and the light made a small pool on the concrete like a confession. She left it on for a minute because objects appreciate ceremony even when they pretend not to. Then she turned it off, marked the unit clean on the clipboard with a pen attached by a chain, and dropped the key into a mouth that had swallowed thousands before. On the drive home, she passed a church sign that had not changed its advice since she was small. Be kind. Everyone is fighting a hard battle. She would have rolled her eyes at 12. She nodded at 40. At a stoplight, a man held a cardboard square with letters that tried to be neat. Need help, it said, and then smaller. Not a bad man, just a broke one. She handed him the rest of her change and a bottle of water she had known would be asked of her eventually. His thank you had the shape of a person accustomed to sudden doors. Years later, when her mother's memory folded itself like a map and slipped into a drawer that did not belong to any room, Leora took the box of letters to the assisted living and read them aloud on Tuesdays. Not all of them. Some are private and stayed private. Enough that a circle of women who had once been harsher with themselves than they deserved sat a little easier in their chairs and made the kinds of noises women make when a sentence lands where the body keeps its truest things. One afternoon, a woman who seldom spoke said softly, "Put a box in a place where a stranger could find it," and then laughed like a girl about to run. If you are listening to this story, there is probably a door near you. A cupboard, a glove compartment, a drawer that has learned patience by becoming cluttered. Somewhere in your town, there is a shelf where someone has left what they could not keep, and someone else will take what they did not know they needed. If you have a tape player, wind a tape with your finger and feel the old physics still answer. If you only have your voice, use it in a room at 2 in the morning and see if the wood answers. If you have a box, consider putting it where a stranger could find it. Write on the lid in pencil so the world knows it can edit. There was no twist here. No ghost in the unit except the ordinary one that lives in paper and insists on teaching us how to carry each other a little farther down the hall. The man who took what was not his did not profit. He apologized. The woman who wrote did not survive long enough to call it a memoir. She survived long enough to call it a door. The man who loved her grew old and kept tune. The people who came after learned the shape of falling in love with strangers and the more difficult shape of giving the thing back. And so, if it is late where you are and the house has stopped making its usual noises, pour water into a glass and notice the sound it makes when it hits the bottom, hollow turning to full. Think of a box under a bed. Think of a storage unit with a label you can't resist. Think of a piano with a hairline crack that still sings like itself. Think of a sentence in a letter that arrives in a year you needed it, from a person who never knew your name and said it anyway by accident. Then stand, walk to whatever door you have, and leave it open for one slow, careful minute, just long enough for someone who needs exactly that door today to find their way through. A hiker found a phone recording. The last minute, he found the phone just before dusk on a switchback above Blue Lake in the San Juan Mountains of southwest Colorado. It lay half buried in scree, face up, a spiderweb crack stitched across the glass, the red record dot stubbornly pulsing as if the device itself refused to look away from whatever it had heard. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The hiker's name was Ansel Rook, 33. A lineman from Pueblo who spent his days climbing utility poles and his weekends climbing whatever rose higher than his weekdays dared. It was late September 2021. The sky had that high-altitude rinse of cobalt that makes evergreen needles look sharper than they are. Below him, the water in the lake caught the last light and held it like a breath. Above him, a line of weather gathered beyond the ridgeline, thin-boned at first, then thickening into something like intention. Ansel lifted the phone with 2 fingers, the way you lift a bird that might be stunned but alive. The recording timestamp read 4:57 p.m. The battery icon showed 2%, then 1. He hesitated. The screen was smeared with a comma of dirt, the kind that comes from a palm skidding along gravel. He did not press play right away. He looked around first, because that is what you do when you find a thing that wants to tell you a story. You make room for it by seeing the place where the story happened. The switchback clung to an outthrust of talus and alpine grass, long blades moving in a wind that never quite became a gust. A cairn stood a little off the trail, too tidy to be natural, too thoughtful to be a prank. Two boot prints were pressed into a patch of damp earth near the cairn, heel then toe, the kind of prints that happen when someone stops and leans forward for a better look at something that never asked to be looked at. Beyond that, the slope fell away into a tumble of shale and broken quartzite, a gray throat that could swallow a person without even needing to clear its own voice. He pressed play. First came footsteps, soft, measured, the sound of trail shoes finding their way over loose stone. Then, wind, not a roar, but a long vowel. A woman's breath, a zipper. The little chirp of a trekking pole knocking against a rock, and then being caught, steadied, forgiven. A far-off raven called once. Then, once again. The recording clipped and crackled, and then let the sound in wider, as if the phone had been lifted from a pocket. The woman's voice arrived next, not speaking to the phone, not to herself exactly, but to the place. Almost there, she said, and even in 2 words there was a smile you could hear. Another voice came in, thinner with distance, male, from above or beyond a switchback. Ansel could not see from his spot. Don't cut the corner. The tone was teasing, not scolding. It carried the kind of affection that worries by pretending not to. I know, the woman answered, and you could hear the grin get wider, as if she liked being told a rule she had already decided to follow. Ansel glanced up the trail, no silhouettes against the ridge, no packs leaning against a crumhole spruce, no motion that would explain a pair becoming 0. On the recording, the footsteps paused, the little metallic skr of a carabiner, a soft hum, tuneless and content, then a small sound that was not content at all. A pebble moving in a way pebbles do not choose for themselves, a slide that was also a decision. Hey, the man's voice said, quick now, and closer, and then there was skin and throat panic wrapped in one word, wait. The breath on the audio sped up, a severe silence followed, a silence full of edges, the way silence gets when it is about to be broken by something you cannot rewind. Then a single sound Ansel would think about later and later and later, a thump like a hand slapping the top of a piano closed. A gasp that turned into a half laugh, because sometimes the body does not admit the truth on the first try. A scrabbling, nails on stone, the phone fell or was dropped. The microphone scraped against the ground and filled the world with sand. Voices blurred, a name rose up out of the grit. Junia. The word was carried like a prayer someone forgot how to finish. More sliding. A shout that stopped without a period. A sound like a pack hitting and then being dragged. Then only wind. Wind and the long, small sparrow of a cry that arrived uninvited from very far down, which might have been a person and might have been granite learning how to speak. The recording ended because the battery couldn't pretend any longer. Ansel stood very still, the phone warm now in his hand, the way a telling is warm the second time through. He tried the word on his own tongue. Junia. He looked where the 2 boot prints ended and where the ground began to pretend it was a floor but wasn't. He approached the cairn and hated it for existing and thanked it for marking the spot all at once. He kneeled and saw the narrow scraped shine a person leaves when their boot finds a path no one built for it. The first drops hit his neck. Big, impatient, high country drops that are not water at all, but announcements. He lit his headlamp early, not because he needed it, but because a cone of light sometimes manages the world better than a wide, honest dark. He pulled an orange bandana from his pocket and tied it to the cairn. He took 3 photos in a slow circle: ground, slope, lake, and the way the sky had folded its arms. Then he did the most useful thing he knew. He climbed down to cell range. The call to the San Juan County Sheriff rang once, twice, and then a voice that had said this greeting more times than it wanted to answered with a name Ansel would remember. Deputy Cale Morrow. Calm. Not bored. Ready. Ansel described it carefully. Coordinates from his handheld GPS, the audio, the voices, the shape the trail made where it almost shook hands with the slope and then thought better of it, the bandana, the weather, rumored by the sky. Stay off the fall line, Morrow said. Get back to Timberline if you can and wait for search and rescue to reach you. Do not go after anyone you cannot see. He breathed in a way that made the phone sound like a lung. We've had a call about a late return from the Blue Lake Spur today. Your timing is not unlucky. It is the clock we were already watching. Ansel did as he was told. He descended to the last stand of wind-shaved spruce and waited, the kind of waiting that hums through bone. He could hear the storm organize itself on the ridge. He could feel how the mountains wear weather like a mood, quickly, convincingly, and then change it without apologizing. Headlamps appeared in the first gray of evening, a cluster of steady stars moving with purpose. 4 figures and a 5th slighter one moving with the confidence of a person who knows where the rocks are even when the rocks won't tell you. The 5th lifted a hand. Her hood was down despite the wind. Her hair was braided tight to keep the night from borrowing it. I'm Dory Keene, she said. San Juan Search and Rescue. This is Micah, Jovan, Arthur, and Wren. You the caller. Ansel nodded and gave them the phone. Dory turned the volume up and held the device near her ear, head bent, eyes closing in that way people have when they magnify one sense by dimming the rest. The others listened too, the small team suddenly one organism. When the man said wait, their spines stilled. When the name rose, Dory's mouth pressed flat, not cold, not warm. Deciding, she handed the phone back and pointed. Show me. They climbed in a line, the kind of line that knows which stones you can trust and which pretend to be trustworthy. The cairn found them. The bandana shivered in its small way. Dory crouched, laid 2 fingers on the scraped shine, and read it the way some people read Braille, asking for permission first. She looked down the slope, her eyes adjusted to a grammar Ansel did not speak. We anchor here, she said. 2 down to the first ledge, 2 on belay, Wren with me at the lip. You, Ansel Rook, you stay with Wren. If I tell you to move left, you move left. He swallowed, which tasted like metal, and nodded. The first thunder spoke. Not near, not far. The polite cousin of a threat. Rope hissed through gloves. Metal clinked with the bright sound mountain metal makes, a sound that knows at least 3 languages and prefers the most precise. Dory called down softly and answered herself when the wind was too busy to carry voices back up. 30 minutes grows very large when you cannot spend it on your own terms. The storm ignored them and then considered them and then walked away to another valley. The sky tried on a paler blue for a minute to see if it fit. Ansel watched a chipmunk watch them with the same fascination he felt. The animal had the kind of confidence that comes from being very good at running from everything. A shout made of 2 syllables rose from below, triumphant and careful at once. Got one? Dory closed her eyes for just long enough to speak without words to whatever listens up there. Then she called back. Name. Micah's voice floated up, thinner than it should have been. Junia. Alive. The sound inside Ansel's chest became something he had not realized he was holding back. He breathed it out in one steady line and leaned both palms into the earth, because you should always touch what keeps you from falling. They worked then. A litter arrived in pieces on shoulders and came together like an idea that had been there all along. Hands did what hands should do when someone needs to be lifted from one kind of gravity into another. They spoke to the person on the ledge in short lines. The way you speak to a horse you love and do not want to spook. Junia, we have you. Junia, do you feel this? Junia, breathe in when I count to 3. We're moving on, nowhere but up. Rain made a sentence across the slope and then erased it again. The wind forgot itself and then remembered. A raven rode the air as if it had invented it. Ansel saw her when they came over the lip. She had the look of someone who had been negotiating with Stone and won, but did not yet dare to celebrate. Mid-30s maybe, hair the color of straw left in the sun, eyes that wanted to close and would not. Blood dried in a tidy line along her left temple. The right knee of her hiking pants was torn, and beneath it, angry purple began to write its name. A bracelet made of 2 woven cords circled her wrist, one blue, one green. The blue was frayed as if teeth had once worried it during a long night. She looked at Ansel first. not because of anything he had done, but because his face was the closest one when the world came back into focus. Her voice was rough from cold and prayer. "Did you hear it? Did you hear me call him?" He did not know who him was, and it did not matter. "Yes," he said, as if yes were a kind of bandage. "We heard you. We came." They moved her in the neat, practiced way people move someone who is more precious than anything else in the room. The rope line looked like music from a distance. The lightning threatened to tune its instruments and then decided not to play. The litter found the shadow of the pines and then the steeper shadow of the trail through meadow. 2 miles became an hour. The trail had arrived with the small surprise a finish line always carries. A white truck from the county waited, engine narrating its own faithfulness. A paramedic named Orrin Hux set hands on Junia with the kind of competence that makes even pain look smaller around the edges. He asked her name to ask her other things. "Junia Ridge," she said. 35. "From Albuquerque. Came up yesterday. Intended to camp. Yes, I was with someone. He was up the switchback. It was our second turn around the lake. That's his phone." She watched Ansel put the device into Orrin's outstretched palm and then closed her eyes because the world was too heavy to carry all the way open. Orrin asked the question that had to be asked. "Where is he?" Junia shook her head once, a small, broken metronome. "I don't know. I slipped." He yelled. "I caught the ledge. I don't know." Dory stood with her back to the truck and looked up at the ridge. Even from the trailhead, she could read the day along the stone. She spoke into the radio with the language that belongs to people who need updates to be short and full, second subject unaccounted, male voice on recovered audio, last known above Blue Lake Switchback 2, weather marginal, lightning east. Request second team from Telluride side if available, plus 1 dog on dawn, copy. It was full dark when the second team arrived. Headlamps stitched the slope like fireflies, convinced they were surgeons. The dog named Pallas, coat black as a charcoal drawing that had learned to move, took the scent from a hat Junia had kept tucked under her hip belt. The dog read the ground like an old friend's letter. Up to the cairn, left where the trail pretends it is a suggestion. Down 3 shelves of stone, some people would call cliffs, and other people would call arguments. Then the animal stopped, sat, whined once, and put its chin on its paws. They found nothing that night. Not nothing in that cruel sense, but nothing you could put your hands on and say this belongs to him. No pack, no trekking pole, no hat. No snack wrapper with a name in tidy black letters like a first day of school. The mountain held its tongue. Morning came with a sky made of tin and apology. They went again, Pallas worked again, Wren set anchors again. Micah called in a voice that refused to become thin. Ansel was sent home because there is a point where more bodies become less help. He drove south toward Durango, the road curling along the Animas River, cottonwoods just beginning to try on their gold. He listened to the recording once more in the motel parking lot, sitting very still, as if any motion would knock truth out of the speakers. Junia woke in a bed that had rails and numbers and beeps. 2 things lived in her body now: pain and the certainty that she had not imagined the second voice. The nurse wrote her name on a whiteboard that greeted morning patients like a cheerful aunt. Junia. The day. The plan. The surgeon's name with its syllables arranged like fence posts. Deputy Cale Morrow came in late morning. He had the kind of careful that does not pretend it isn't careful. He set a small gray recorder on the tray table with the gelatin cup and did not move it closer to her as if it were a burden. He asked permission. She nodded. He asked again because some nods do not mean yes. She said yes. He pressed the button and spoke the words aloud the way people do when they want to make the world behave. Interview with Junia Ridge. Date, time, present, she told him. The way the weather had looked all day like a bluff, and how bluffs tire themselves out eventually. The man she had met at the trailhead that morning when she realized she'd left her stove fuel on the driver's seat back in town, and he had said without flinching, "I have more than I need, take mine." His name was Orrin Bale. Not a common name, which helped the telling and hurt the hurt. He was 39, maybe 40. He had the kind of smile that makes coffee taste the way it ought to. He had the kind of pace that lets conversation sit down and stay a while. He had his sister's dog and a photo on his phone and had not tried to pretend it was his own. He had said it was his first time above 12,000 feet since he was a boy and that the air was thinner, but his head felt clearer and wasn't that funny. She had not planned to hike with him. They had both headed out early to beat the thunderheads that never quite decided to arrive. They crossed the first creek together because rocks are often friendships in disguise. They turned at the little waterfall, then again where the climb gets greedy. Somewhere near noon, they split. He to the saddle above the lake to look for ptarmigan, she to the outcrop on the western side where the blue looks bottomless and makes you feel the size of your own heartbeat. They regrouped by accident among a stand of willows that kept the wind in its coat. They ate together because food tastes better when someone else laughs at your almonds for being aspirational and you laugh at their gummy bears for being perfect. He offered the second loop around the lake, and she said yes, because saying yes is sometimes a way of agreeing with the day. And then the fall. And then the seconds that were longer than seconds. The name she tried to lace to him as if names were rope. The way the ledge held and then complained and then held again. The fact that there had been no shout that sounded like pain, only a shout that sounded like surprise, and then a long conversation between gravity and silence that ended with silence believing it had won. Cale listened the way people listen when they use listening as a tool. He did not say, "I am sorry," in the first 5 minutes, because sometimes sorry has to wait its turn behind words that can anchor an actual investigation. He asked for a description that could be drawn into a cruiser laptop sketch. He asked for the brand of the pack, the color of the jacket, the kind of hat. He asked if Oren had a habit of humming, joking, leaning to his left when he walked. Junia closed her eyes and watched the man step through the room her mind made of the trail. He hummed, she said finally, low, tuneless, when he tried to put a word to a story he had not told yet. He leaned into weather, as if weather liked people who leaned back. They searched 3 days. Helicopter on day 2, when the wind played nice, no body, no sign. The slope did what slopes do. It took the small and offered back the smaller, a strap end. A pocket knife that might have belonged to anyone. A grin of metal that once was a grommet. Nothing that knew how to clap its hands and say, mine. The internet made its murmurs the way it does. The forums filled with conjecture. The ones who have never been above tree line explain to the ones who have exactly how Talus works. A post from a cousin arrived in the kind of font grief chooses when it has to choose one. Have you seen him? Another from a person who knew a person who might have known him and wrote that he was the kind of man who never took the last donut. A stranger said, why was she with him at all, as if who walks beside you guarantees you a ladder back down. Dory Keene did not read the forums. She read the mountain. On day 4, she told Cale in a voice that allowed both compassion and math that if the slope had decided to keep him, it likely would continue to keep him until snow learned what it wanted to do and then taught them in spring. Cale nodded, his jaw set lazy and hard, the way the river sets a stone down and then decides where it lives. Junia went home to Albuquerque with stitches like commas along her hairline and a knee wrapped in instructions. She slept 4 nights without the part of sleep that heals. On the 5th night, she dreamed of blue water that did not know it was cold, and a voice saying, wait, in a tone of gentle impatience, as if wait were a surprise party she would like if she would just stop walking long enough to see the lights. Come on. Ansel went back to work. Poles. Wire. The logic of circuits. He found himself stopping on the shoulders of county roads to watch clouds interrogate a ridge and answer themselves with rain. He listened to the recording once more, then deleted it because a voice should be treated like a person's glove. Pick it up only if it is yours or if the person who wore it has asked you to hand it back. The snow came in late October, the way it comes in the San Juans, when it decides to be industrious. It buried the slope's grammar, it set down the season like a book a child might not be ready for. Thanksgiving arrived with a turkey that somebody had to carve whether they wanted to or not. December wrote its short letters, and January forgot to put a return address on anything. In early June of the next year, when the snowpack loosened its jaw, 2 things happened on the same day. At 11:19 in the morning, A pair of hikers from Montrose came down from the saddle above Blue Lake early because the sun had made everything overconfident and the heat on the rock had learned to be a lie. They paused near the outthrust of Talus, where a cairn had once worn an orange bandana and now wore nothing but its own small pride. A zipper glinted among the stones. The zipper was attached to a jacket the color of fog. The jacket was wrapped around the idea of a man. They did what the poster in the ranger station says to do when a finding stops being a finding and becomes a person. Mark the spot. Note the time. Back away in the exact steps you made arriving. Carry more silence than you usually carry. Call. The second thing that happened at 1:27 in the afternoon occurred in a backyard in Albuquerque where the cottonwood shed its soft snow over a patch of lawn that wanted more water than the city wanted to give it. Junia's phone chimed. She looked down, thinking it would be the alert she still had not turned off for the county updates. Instead, there was a text from a number she had written down on a napkin and saved on purpose. It said only this: "We found him. Dory." Junia sat on the back steps and watched three ants perform a task more complicated than any she had been assigned that week. She did not cry because they had prepared her politely not to expect this. She did not smile because smiling was a verb her face had not practiced with that sentence. She pressed call and heard a voice that wore dust and care. Dory told her what could be told on a phone and promised the rest would be told face to face, because some tellings don't belong to towers and waves. A week later, Junia drove north, past Espanola, where the signs know two languages, past Abiquiu, where the river looks like it can't help but gather light, over the state line, that is a thought and a mile marker and a map all at once, into the San Juans, where the air remembers your first name and uses it. Dory met her at the small office with the big map and two chairs that had learned to carry tired people. Cale was there too. He set a folder on the table and did not open it until her hands rested on her knees, the way you rest a cup on a saucer. "We recovered Mr. Bale," he said, and the word recovered did not feel like anything except exactly itself. Two hikers saw the jacket. He left the trail at the switchback, slipped on the lip, and fell more than 30 feet to a shelf. The shelf kept him for winter. He likely died on impact. No signs of anything except the mountain doing what mountains do when you ask them to hold a human being. The autopsy says the thing autopsies say when physics chooses the verbs. She asked the question that had been living in her since the voice said, "Wait, did he speak after I slipped?" We can't say, Cale said. And then because the truth deserved a little mercy, he added, "The shelf where we found him was below your ledge, not above it." Which means his voice on the recording was in the seconds before you both stopped standing and started falling. After that, he would have been below you. If you don't remember hearing him then, that is your brain giving you a gift it knew you could not buy for yourself yet. Dory laid something on the table wrapped in a brown paper lunch bag. "We think this is yours," she said. "We found it lodged in a crack just above where you came to rest. It had become part of the mountain, but it was stubborn in a way that listened." Junia unwrapped the thing, the bracelet from her wrist. The blue and green cords had become one color winter makes. The frayed end had been burnt to keep the braid from unraveling and then worn down again by time. She turned it in her hand, thumb finding the place where the weave had learned her skin and made it a home. "He gave me this at the trailhead," she said. "He said he made two of them when he decided to stop drinking 3 years ago. He kept the green, he wore it under his watch. He gave me the blue because I said I had stopped apologizing for being careful the year before, and he laughed and said, 'That sounds like a thing worth marking.' We only knew each other a handful of hours. And yet," she closed her fingers, then opened them again. "Ansel Rook sent me the audio file. Did you know that? He asked if it would help. I said yes before I knew the answer. It did not help, and it did. Both are true." They stood later at the trailhead. The mountains looked less like authorities and more like the long, patient elders they are. A breeze moved through the spruce in a way that would be mistaken for whispering if you were the kind of person who liked to be mistaken that way. Junia closed her eyes and saw the shelf she had not seen. She said his name once out loud and not loud, the syllables answered by not answering at all. They buried Orrin Bale in a small cemetery behind a church that had learned to be ecumenical because the weather didn't care which god you favored. His sister came with the dog whose photo he had shown. She spoke without paper, which meant her mouth borrowed words from the heart, and the heart forgave the mouth for not being tidier. Junia stood 2 rows back and pressed her fingers into the bracelet and found she did not have to press very hard to feel the world answer. Ansel did not come to the service because attendance is sometimes not the right way to honor a stranger you helped. He drove a route that took him past a ridgeline and paused in the pullout that locals use because it's theirs. He left his truck idling. He rolled the window down. A meadowlark said something with conviction and melody. He answered, "I hear you," and meant it. As summer leaned hard into itself, tourists thinned the trails with their curiosity and filled the cafes with their hunger. The blue of Blue Lake looked less like an opinion and more like proof. Dory kept her team on the same frequency, even on days when no one needed rescuing, because habit saves more lives than heroics. Cale kept notches in his days for the kind of paperwork no show has ever made look interesting. It was work. It mattered that it was work. Years later, in a living room in Santa Fe, Junia would set a phone on a table between 2 mugs and play the last minute for a friend who asked very gently to hear it. The friend would listen with eyes open because some listenings deserve witness. In that small recording lived a hill, a sky, a woman, a man, a word made of 4 letters in air, and a sort of silence you learn to share with people you trust. When it ended, they would sit still long enough that the room would remember they were there and offer them back their voices. "What do you make of it?" the friend would ask, not to argue, just to let the world have one more chance to tell her what it thinks it is. That he said, "Wait," Junia would answer, and meant it kindly. That I said "almost there," and meant it with all my heart. That the mountain was not a villain and not a friend. That the cliff listened and then did what cliffs do. That the phone fell the way a witness sometimes falls and still did its job. That people who did not know me put a rope on and let me become part of their workday. That the second voice is a place in my head now where something can live without having to die again. She would hold up her wrist. The bracelet would have been replaced by another that looked very much like it and not at all like it, blue and green, new knots, same story. She would say, "I tell the mountains out loud now when I turn around." I say, "See, this is me deciding to see you again." And sometimes the wind says nothing back, and sometimes it says a sound that is not a word and still feels like one. Here is what does not always fit in the write-up. The last minute of a recording can keep playing long after the file ends. The man's wait can become a way to step out of traffic, to carry a ladder with a friend, to hold a door without trying to become the door. The woman's almost there can become a way to measure a good day, not by miles, but by a turn you made toward kindness when no one was checking your odometer. If you go to the San Juans, and I hope you do, look up. Say the names of the peaks, like they are elders you respect. Tell the sky you will be back before it begins to think about electricity. Pack a bandana, a bright color that could be seen from far away by a stranger who might need a small flag to make a big decision. If you find a cairn, leave it be unless a ranger told you otherwise. If you find a phone, do what Ansel did. Press play only after you have looked around. Then, if you must, listen. Hear the footsteps, the wind, the breath. The word that might be a prayer and might be a joke and might be both. Decide carefully what you will do with the minute you have been given. It will be late somewhere by the time you finish this. It will be early somewhere else. The country is wide and the mountains are quiet, and the phones we carry don't always know when to stop telling the truth. If tonight you hear the wind make a sound that asks you to wait, take one step back from the edge and put your hand on your own shoulder the way a good friend would. If tomorrow your trail offers you a second loop, say yes or no out loud so the day can hear you and keep its promise not to argue. And if the last minute ever finds you the way it found Ansel, at the exact space where listening became a kind of work, let your voice be the one that says, "We hear you, we're coming," then come.